I never imagined I'd feel invisible in my own family, but here I am, standing in the corner of that crowded auditorium, watching my niece walk across the stage and feeling like a ghost. At 35, I'm the responsible one in the Williams family, the silent anchor holding everything together. I'm the school counselor who listens to teenagers' heartbreaks all day, then comes home to patch up family fractures no one else acknowledges. I've paid for Michael's college tuition, almost $25,000, while he shrugged it off like it was nothing. I lent Mom and Dad $15,000 for those shaky repairs on their old house, even though my own apartment is falling apart. And just last month, I quietly covered the bulk of Emma's baby shower expenses, making sure it was perfect, while she rolled her eyes at my cheap decorations. At the ceremony tonight, the applause for my niece feels hollow, overshadowed by Emma's smug smile as she takes all the credit. Emma Cooper, my sister-in-law, has a way of making me feel small, always criticizing my frugality, dismissing my contributions as penny-pinching or not family spirit. Yet I keep a secret weapon locked away, detailed records, ledgers and receipts of every dollar, every favor, every sacrifice. Nobody knows. I hold on to hope that one day, someone will see the truth and recognize the invisible weight I carry. But tonight, watching them all cheer for Emma's family, I wonder if that day will ever come, or if I'm destined to stay the silent provider, overlooked and taken for granted. Growing up, the imbalance was baked into every family holiday and dinner table conversation. I remember one Christmas when I was 16, clutching the small pile of gifts I'd bought with my babysitting money, hand-picked presents for Mom, Dad, Michael, even a tiny one for Emma, who wasn't in the family yet, but already loomed large in my mind. Michael got the expensive gadgets and clothes from Mom and Dad, while I received a card signed with a perfunctory, "Merry Christmas." At first, I told myself it was just how families worked. Michael was the golden child, the son who would carry on the family legacy, and I was the responsible daughter expected to sacrifice without complaint. When Emma married Michael, the favoritism only intensified. She glided into the family with her charm and sharp tongue, quickly becoming the center of attention, the perfect daughter-in-law in my mother's eyes. I still remember the sting when Emma's parents refused to pay for their own daughter's wedding, and I quietly stepped in with $10,000 to keep the peace, swallowing my pride and my doubts. The family normalized this pattern. Emma and her family leaned on me financially while I was labeled stingy or too serious for questioning it. I told myself these sacrifices were just part of being family, that love meant giving until I had nothing left. But beneath that rationalization, a small voice whispered that this wasn't right, that maybe the family I loved was built on a foundation that didn't include me. I've tried to prove my worth in every way I know. I lent Emma $20,000 to set up the nursery for her baby, covering every crib, blanket, and stroller she needed, all while managing the household expenses during family gatherings, paying for food, decorations, and even the cleaning services no one else would think to hire. When Emma's pregnancy complications led to unexpected medical bills totaling $12,000, I quietly took care of them, never asking for repayment. Beyond money, I carry the emotional labor, organizing holidays, mediating disputes, smoothing over harsh words, and keeping the fragile peace. Yet, despite all this, Emma and her father, Jacob Cooper, constantly belittle me, calling me stingy and too rigid. Michael, caught in the middle, mostly stays silent, unwilling to challenge his wife. Mom praises Emma endlessly, crowning her the perfect daughter-in-law and brushing off my efforts as just doing what's expected. Thankfully, I have David, my boyfriend, who listens, supports, and encourages me to document everything, to keep a record of every dollar, every slight, every sacrifice. It's become my secret power, a digital archive and ledger that no one suspects I maintain. But for all my meticulous records and quiet endurance, I lack the courage to confront the family, fearing the fractures it might cause. So I hold my tongue, burying my hurt beneath a polite smile, hoping that someday the truth will speak louder than their dismissive words. At the graduation ceremony, I arrived with a heart full of pride and a nervous hope that maybe, just maybe, my presence would be acknowledged. Instead, Emma wasted no time turning the spotlight away from me. As she stood up to give a toast, her voice dripping with calculated sweetness, she said, "I guess Linda finally showed up," and the room exploded with laughter. Family, friends, even some teachers, all eyes flicked to me, a mix of surprise and amusement in their gaze. My cheeks burned with humiliation, my throat tightened, but I held my ground, swallowing the sting. Michael avoided my eyes, and Mom clapped politely, though her smile looked forced, uncomfortable. The moment was unbearable, a public spectacle of my invisibility and Emma's dominance. Inside, I battled the urge to snap back, to defend myself, but a familiar voice whispered caution. Better to stay quiet than to stir the pot. I told myself that Emma's jab was just jealousy or insecurity, a moment of weakness from someone who felt threatened. Still, as I sat down, the seed of doubt took root in my heart. Was I truly invisible? Had I been fooling myself all these years, believing in the family's unity? The laughter echoed in my ears long after the ceremony ended, a small, painful crack in the foundation of my hope. For the first time, I wondered if silence was really strength, or just the beginning of a long, lonely fight to be seen. After that humiliating toast, I thought maybe Emma would back off, but instead, she saw my silence as weakness, an opening to strike harder. It began subtly, like a cold wind creeping through the cracks in a window. At our next family brunch, the tension was palpable before anyone spoke. Emma, with that saccharine smile that never reached her eyes, leaned over to a cousin and whispered loudly enough for me to hear, "Linda's always been too controlling, never really supportive of anyone but herself." Her words spread like wildfire, carried by her loyal friends and in-laws who acted as her flying monkeys. I caught snippets of hushed conversations as people avoided my gaze, the pity or disdain in their eyes stabbing deeper than words. Then, without warning, Emma lashed out where it hurt most. As I reached for a plate, she snapped, "Maybe if Linda stopped hoarding money and playing the victim, this family wouldn't be such a mess." The room froze. Jacob, Emma's father, added his venomous approval. "And don't forget how she's always been reckless with her spending. Like that time she blew all that cash on herself instead of pulling her weight." My heart hammered. My hands trembled, but I forced calm. Their accusations twisted reality, gaslighting me into doubting my own memories and records. Emma insisted the loans I gave were gifts, debts I owed to the family in gratitude. Slowly, the family began to sway, enchanted by her charm and her version of the story. I tried to speak, to protest quietly, but my words were met with polite nods and quick changes of subject. The isolation was suffocating, but I refused to retreat completely. Each subtle rebuttal I uttered was a small act of resistance, even if it felt like shouting into a void. The tug-of-war between their attacks and my quiet pushback ratcheted up the tension, leaving me raw and wary, sensing the battle had only just begun. Still clinging to threads of hope, I decided to confront the storm head-on with reason. I arranged a meeting with Michael, Emma, and Mom, determined to lay everything on the table. The day felt heavy, the air thick with unspoken grievances as we sat around the kitchen table, the tension simmering under forced smiles. I took a deep breath and began to present my meticulously kept records, the months and years of expenses I had covered, the emotional labor I had poured into keeping the family afloat. I spoke calmly, appealing to values I hoped we all shared: fairness, respect, and love. But Emma's eyes glazed over in faux concern before she twisted my words with practiced ease. She accused me of coldly keeping score, of trying to control the family like some puppet master. Mom's face hardened, her favoritism clear as she dismissed my claims as exaggerations born from bitterness. Michael, caught between loyalty and peacekeeping, offered no defense, his silence louder than any words. A distant cousin who had agreed to mediate skimmed over the evidence with a careless wave, calling it family disagreements. As I listened to their dismissals, a crushing wave of loneliness settled onto my chest. I had come seeking understanding, but I left feeling smaller, more invisible than ever. Emma's manipulation had worked. She'd painted me as the troublemaker, the one trying to fracture the family. The sorrow stung deeply, but beneath it burned a quiet resolve. This failure wasn't the end. It was a painful pivot point. If they wouldn't hear me now, I would find another way to make them see the truth. The holiday gathering that year was meant to be a celebration, but it quickly turned into a nightmare I never expected. The house buzzed with chatter and laughter, the aroma of roast filling every corner. I tried to stay in the background, but Emma had other plans. Midway through dinner, she stood abruptly, her voice ringing out like a verdict. "Linda's been mismanaging family funds for years," she announced, eyes gleaming with cruel satisfaction. "She borrowed $47,000 and never paid it back." A hush fell. Michael and Mom exchanged shocked looks, their faces a mix of confusion and disbelief. Emma produced what she claimed were bank statements, documents forged to implicate me, linking my social security number to debts and credit cards tied to her own address. The room buzzed with whispers, the weight of accusation heavier than the holiday feast. I opened my mouth to speak, to deny, but Emma cut me down with mocking laughter, painting me as careless and irresponsible. The humiliation was unbearable, not just before family, but neighbors, friends, people who knew me as the steady counselor, the dependable one. The accusation hinted at identity theft, a serious crime, and the implications threatened my professional reputation and social standing. My chest tightened, breath catching in my throat, but I refused to crumble. The pain was raw, but my spirit didn't break. This was more than a family spat. It was a calculated attack meant to destroy me. As the night wore on, the sting of betrayal settled deep, and I knew the stakes had been raised beyond anything I had imagined. The battle lines were clear, and the war for my dignity was becoming real. Desperation drove me to one last attempt at peace. I sought Emma out privately, away from prying eyes and judgmental ears. My voice was steady, but carried the weight of all the pain and exhaustion I'd buried for years. I told her plainly what I needed: for the lies to stop, for the credit damage to be repaired, and for her to acknowledge the sacrifices I had made, not just for her, but for the whole family. I even offered to help cover some of the legitimate expenses, hoping to find common ground. But Emma's cold gaze didn't waver. She dismissed me with a cruel laugh, calling me delusional and obsessed with control. She threatened to escalate her accusations if I didn't back down. My plea, "I just want peace and fairness," fell on deaf ears, swallowed by her icy refusal. The rejection hit like a fist to the stomach, leaving me breathless and betrayed. In that moment, the fragile hope I'd clung to shattered. Emma's refusal wasn't just stubbornness, it was a line crossed, a door slammed shut on reconciliation. I stood there, feeling powerless but also strangely clear-headed. The old ways hadn't worked. There would be no peace without truth. The weight of rejection was heavy, but beneath it, a new resolve began to form. This was no longer about quiet endurance. It was time to fight back, to reclaim my dignity on my own terms. The aftermath of Emma's rejection crashed over me like a relentless tide, dragging me deeper into a pit I hadn't thought possible. The news of the credit fraud flew through the family grapevine faster than I could catch my breath. Emma's version of the story, so carefully crafted, so viciously delivered, spread like wildfire, and the flames of doubt consumed everything I'd tried to build. At family gatherings, I felt eyes flick to me with skepticism or thinly veiled judgment, some even whispering behind quick, polite smiles. Michael retreated into silence, avoiding me like I'd become a contagious disease. His refusal to stand up to Emma felt like a knife twisting in my back. Mom's words cut the deepest. She criticized me openly, calling me dramatic and dishonest, accusing me of tearing apart the family over imagined slights. Even friends I'd trusted started questioning my integrity, their voices laced with uncertainty and hesitation. I was unraveling, thread by thread, isolated in a room full of people who once called me sister, daughter, friend. The walls of my apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt like a prison lined with mirrors reflecting my failures. Phone calls went unanswered. Invitations ceased. My credit, flagged by financial institutions as risky, jeopardized my dream of buying a home. The weight of it pressed down on me. sapping my professional confidence. Even at work, where I'd always been the pillar for others, I found myself second-guessing every word, every decision. The counselor who had helped countless students navigate their pain was drowning in her own. I questioned if I had misread everything. Had I been the fool all along? Had my sacrifices been invisible? My honesty twisted into villainy? These doubts gnawed at me in the quiet hours, threatening to swallow the last flicker of hope. Only David remained unwavering, a lifeline in the storm. His voice was steady, a quiet anchor reminding me to hold fast to the truth, even when it felt like the world was collapsing. The loneliness was suffocating, but somewhere in the marrow of that despair, a fragile spark flickered. I realized that if I was to survive this, and more than survive to reclaim myself, I had to fight smarter, harder, and on my own terms. The crushing failure was not the end. It was the forge shaping me, preparing me for a reckoning I hadn't yet dared to imagine. The baby shower was supposed to be a celebration, but it became the stage for my shattering. I arrived early, heart heavy, clutching a checkbook I'd emptied for Emma's extravagant event. The house buzzed with chatter and laughter, but beneath the surface, tension rippled like an undercurrent. As I moved through the crowd, I caught Emma's voice, sharp and triumphant. "I used Linda's social security number to build my credit," she boasted to a cluster of relatives, her eyes gleaming with cruel pride. "Played the system perfectly. No one suspected a thing." The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My hands trembled involuntarily, a cold fury erupting in my chest. I stood frozen, watching as the guests exchanged shocked glances, some whispering in disbelief, others nodding along with complicity. Emma laughed, a harsh, victorious sound that echoed in the room, drowning out my silent scream. In that moment, something inside me fractured and hardened simultaneously. The betrayal was complete, my own identity weaponized by someone I'd trusted implicitly. I felt the weight of years of unseen labor and sacrifice collapse into that single, unbearable scene. A voice inside me snapped, sharp and cold. "This ends now." No longer would I be the family scapegoat, the silent ATM drained dry and discarded. I would confront this head-on, publicly, decisively. The thought of calling the police in that moment was not hesitation. It was resolve crystallized into action. The room, the people, the lies, they would all witness the truth. Humiliation and rage collided, igniting an undeniable power. The balance of this family's twisted game was about to shift, and I was done playing defense. After the storm of the baby shower, I sought refuge in the quiet solitude of my apartment, walls closing in as I grappled with the magnitude of the betrayal. Alone, the years of sacrifices, the emotional and financial debts I had silently carried, played back in my mind with painful clarity. Every dinner I'd organized, every dollar lent without a word, every compromise made to keep peace, it all suddenly felt like chains binding me to a toxic cycle. The realization struck hard. I wasn't just exploited. I was systematically erased and vilified whenever I dared to stand for myself. That bitter truth ignited a fierce anger, raw and unfiltered, coursing through my veins. I could taste the bitterness on my tongue, the years of being dismissed as too serious, stingy, or worse, the problem. But with that anger came clarity. I was more than the family's invisible provider, more than Emma's scapegoat. I had a right to my dignity, to justice, to a life free from manipulation and lies. The phrase, "never again," echoed in my mind like a battle cry. I refused to be the quiet victim any longer. The emotional shroud of doubt lifted, replaced by a growing confidence that I was reclaiming my voice, my power. I saw the patterns clear now, the favoritism, the manipulation, the cruel games masked as family loyalty. This was unacceptable, and I would not let it continue. In that quiet moment of reckoning, I embraced a new identity, not of suffering, but of strength. The path ahead was uncertain, but my resolve was unshakable. That night, I turned to David, my steadfast ally and the only person who had stood by me unwaveringly. In the soft glow of my living room lamp, I laid bare every scar, every betrayal, every injustice I'd endured. Together, We began to map a plan, not just to survive Emma's toxic grasp, but to expose it for all to see. I spoke of the detailed records I'd kept, the ledgers, receipts, and communications that could not be denied. David listened intently, nodding as I carefully articulated my strategy: to use truth as a weapon, to turn family allies against Emma by revealing her deceit, subtly but undeniably. We discussed the importance of patience and precision, of controlling the narrative rather than letting it spiral out of my control. Public family events, once battlegrounds of humiliation, would become stages for revelation, quietly gathering witnesses, documenting every move, exposing every lie. I resolved to approach this with calm authority, shedding the desperate tone of the past for a measured, strategic posture. David's support was a balm, his faith in me rekindling a hope I feared lost. We talked late into the night, refining steps, anticipating backlash, preparing for the long fight ahead. The emotional tempest had given way to a cold, clear-headed resolve. I was no longer a passive participant in this family's drama. I was an architect of change. The first moves of the quiet war had begun, and I was ready to endure whatever came next. I spread out the papers across the dining table, the faint smell of old ink and forgotten receipts mingling with the sharp scent of my morning coffee. Each sheet was a thread in the tangled web that bound my family's financial reality, a reality I was only now beginning to fully grasp. The numbers stared back at me. $47,000 in unauthorized charges linked directly to Emma's lavish address, bills I had quietly covered without question, mortgage payments that kept their home afloat while mine barely made a dent in the rent. I traced each transaction carefully, the weight of these invisible debts settling heavier with every line. It wasn't just money, it was control. Emma and Jacob's comfortable lifestyle, their power in the family, rested squarely on my shoulders. The realization was both crushing and oddly empowering. I called in a financial advisor, someone objective and sharp-eyed, hoping to untangle the knots I could no longer see clearly. Sitting across from me in a small, sterile office, the advisor's voice was clinical but illuminating. She pointed out glaring inconsistencies in Emma's claims, expenses labeled as family support that were nothing more than extravagant indulgences. More than that, she highlighted the family's potential legal exposure. If I chose to act, the documents I'd kept, every bank statement, every receipt, every text message, were ammunition. But the most startling revelation was how deeply intertwined Michael's career was with my quiet support. From late-night childcare to networking favors, I had been the unseen backbone propping up his success, while he remained oblivious or unwilling to acknowledge it. Back at home, I began organizing everything into a clear chronological timeline, each entry a testament to years of silent sacrifice. The process was exhausting, but with every page I felt my confidence grow. I held the key to dismantling the false narrative Emma had spun, and that truth was my secret power. The family's dependence on me, once a burden, transformed into leverage. I wasn't just a victim, I was a force poised for strategic retaliation. The delicate balance of power, so long tipped in Emma's favor, was beginning to shift. This was no longer about survival. It was about reclaiming what was rightfully mine through the undeniable strength of evidence and truth. Though the weight of betrayal still pressed on my chest, I felt a flicker of hope ignite. For the first time, I saw a path forward, not through confrontation fueled by emotion, but through calculated, deliberate moves. The family's facade of unity was brittle, propped up by my sacrifices and their willful blindness. Now, armed with clarity and proof, I could begin to unravel their illusions from within. The thought both terrified and exhilarated me. I was stepping into unknown territory, but I was no longer resigned to being the family's scapegoat. I was ready to be the architect of change, and every receipt and record was a brick in the fortress I was building to shield myself and expose the rot beneath. Despite the turmoil swirling inside me, I knew the coming days demanded discretion. I returned the papers to their neat stacks, locking the folders away in a drawer I seldom opened. The battle was far from public, and it had to remain that way for now. Emma had no idea of the storm gathering beneath her smug confidence. As I locked the drawer, The faint click resonated in my chest like a promise. The quiet reckoning had begun. Maintaining the calm mask I wore around the family was exhausting, but I knew it was necessary. Outwardly, I smiled politely at gatherings, exchanged pleasantries, and played the role of the gracious sister while the storm brewed beneath. Behind closed doors, I took practical steps to secure my defenses. The first was digital. I changed every password, activated two-factor authentication, and requested credit freezes on all my accounts. The thought of Emma or Jacob slipping into my financial life again sickened me, but I was done leaving doors open. Each click and keystroke was an act of reclaiming control over parts of my life that had been hijacked for too long. Next, I consulted a lawyer, someone recommended by David, who had become my unwavering ally. Sitting in that sterile office, I was given a clearer picture of my legal standing, my rights, and the options available if Emma refused to cease her manipulations. We drafted letters, firm but measured, threatening formal action if the harassment and financial exploitation didn't stop. The idea of confronting her directly terrified me, but the knowledge that I had legal backing gave me a quiet strength I hadn't felt before. These letters were not just warnings. They were my first moves in a long game of accountability. Quietly, I reached out to extended family members, those I suspected were neutral or potentially sympathetic. Carefully worded messages planted seeds of doubt about Emma's narratives without outright accusation. I knew the family's loyalty was fragile, and the truth was a weapon best wielded subtly. David helped me prepare a dossier, an organized, factual collection of evidence and timelines to share with those I trusted most. Publicly, I kept attending family events, each smile and nod a calculated performance. Beneath that calm facade, my mind raced, strategizing and anticipating every possible reaction. The tension was suffocating, like holding my breath underwater, but I refused to let it show. Every moment felt like walking a tightrope. One misstep could undo months of preparation. Yet, beneath the surface, I was changing. The years of silent suffering were giving way to a measured, strategic resolve. The family's blindness to their own complicity was my advantage. They remained unaware of the quiet avalanche building beneath their feet. I was no longer the desperate victim, but a calculated strategist, ready to reclaim my life and expose the truth on my terms. The calm before the storm stretched long, but I welcomed it. The quiet preparation was my shield and sword. The next moves would be decisive. The discovery was accidental but seismic. While helping my mother sort through dusty boxes in the attic, my fingers brushed against a worn envelope tucked beneath a stack of old ledgers. Inside was a letter from my late grandfather, addressed to Mom. The handwriting was fading, the paper brittle, but the message was crystal clear. A secret clause in my father's will explicitly tied the family's inheritance to conditions of financial honesty and respect within the extended family. The letter warned that any mismanagement or exploitation, particularly by Emma's side, would trigger disinheritance. My breath caught as I read the lines, the weight of decades of unspoken family rules suddenly pressing down on me. The letter was more than just a legal footnote. It was a game changer. It gave me leverage beyond mere evidence of fraud. Emma's financial security and her hold on family wealth were suddenly vulnerable. But the shock was twofold. The letter hinted that Mom had known about this clause, but chose to ignore or suppress it out of favoritism. That betrayal cut deeper than Emma's manipulations. The woman who should have protected me had turned a blind eye, allowing the rot to fester. My hands trembled as I copied the document carefully, knowing this was a weapon, but also a burden. I reached out to my lawyer and David immediately, their calm voices grounding me as we discussed the implications. This letter could galvanize those in the family growing tired of Emma's dominance. It was the key to rallying allies and exposing the truth in a way no one could dismiss. The urgency was palpable. I had to move quickly before Emma uncovered this vulnerability and fortified her defenses. The discovery injected a fierce new determination into me. The stakes had just escalated far beyond personal betrayal. It was now a battle for justice and survival within the family's fragile power structure. As I sat back, the letter resting on the table like a silent judge, I realized the path ahead was sharper and more dangerous than I'd imagined. But I was ready. This wasn't just about reclaiming dignity anymore. It was about dismantling a carefully constructed empire of lies. The hidden clause was my sword and shield, a secret weapon that could finally tip the scales. The quiet war was about to become undeniable. With the letter secured and my evidence meticulously organized, I took the first concrete steps of my plan. I sent formal notices to Emma and Jacob, outlining the fraud and the potential legal consequences they faced if restitution wasn't made immediately. The tone was firm but professional, a clear message that I was done tolerating their exploitation. Simultaneously, I withdrew all the informal financial support I'd been providing for years. Childcare offers stopped, household help ceased, and I declined every request for just a little more. I watched quietly as Emma's comfortable lifestyle began to shift, the cracks subtly appearing where once there had been ease. Privately, I shared the letter and my dossier with Michael and Mom, framing it as a family issue requiring accountability rather than a personal vendetta. Their reactions were mixed. Michael's silence weighed heavily, but Mom's face betrayed confusion and unease. The seed of doubt was planted. Emma, for her part, remained oblivious to the connections I was drawing. She dismissed my actions as petty retaliation, laughing off the letters and the sudden withdrawal of support as sour grapes. But beneath her bravado, I sensed unease. The subtle shifts in family conversations, the sideways glances, the whispered questions, they were all signs her grip was loosening. The first tangible consequences were small but significant. Emma's usual smokescreens faltered, and her carefully maintained narrative began to unravel in the eyes of relatives who had once been her staunchest allies. Though she hadn't yet grasped the full extent of my leverage, the dynamic had changed irrevocably. The balance of power, once so heavily weighted in her favor, was tilting. I watched and waited, my resolve steady as the first moves in a long game began to dismantle the empire built on my silence. The family's blind loyalty was no longer a given, and the quiet reckoning was underway. The summer sun dangled high, casting a warm glow over the familiar park where our family reunion was unfolding. Children's laughter mingled with the hum of conversation, the subtle clinking of glasses echoing from the picnic tables. I stood near the shade of an old oak tree, clutching a folder heavy with proof. My heart hammered, not with fear, but with a fierce clarity I'd never felt before. This was the moment I'd rehearsed silently for weeks, a moment where silence would finally shatter and truth would rise like a tide. Emma approached, radiant as ever, her smile sharp and practiced. The crowd was growing, extended family and friends drifting closer, their chatter light and unaware. I cleared my throat, steadying my voice through the swell of adrenaline. "Everyone," I began, holding up the folder. "There's something important that needs to be said today." Eyes turned to me, curious, cautious. I met Emma's gaze, unwavering. For years, I carried a burden in silence, one that's cost me more than just money. It's cost me dignity. I opened the folder, revealing spreadsheets, credit statements, and a faded letter. The very letter hidden away in my mother's attic that held the power to unravel years of deceit. The room fell into a thick, stunned quiet as I laid out the evidence. Unauthorized charges racking up over $75,000, each tied directly to Emma's lavish lifestyle. My social security number used without consent. Emma's manipulations, shielded by our family's willful blindness. I heard a gasp, a whisper, then Michael's sharp intake of breath. Emma's smile faltered, her facade cracking as she stammered weak denials, trying to twist the narrative, but the weight of proof was undeniable. "This family deserves honesty," I said, voice firm but calm, "and respect. I am done being invisible." Michael's conflicted eyes softened. Rachel's proud mask began to slip, replaced by reluctant acknowledgement. In that charged moment, the tide turned. I was no longer the silent victim, but the rightful bearer of truth, setting boundaries that no one could ignore. The champagne moment wasn't just about exposure. It was about reclaiming my place in the family I'd once lost to silence. The fallout was swift and brutal. Whispers spun through the family like wildfire, and I watched as Emma's carefully constructed world crumbled before my eyes. Once warm smiles turned icy, conversations hushed when she entered a room. Cousins, aunts, Even distant relatives confronted her with questions sharp as knives. Emma's calls to Michael and Jacob became desperate, laden with apologies so hollow they echoed with insincerity. I ignored her frantic pleas when she reached out to me personally, her honeyed words and tears falling flat against the armor of my resolve. The love bombing she once wielded as a weapon now rang hollow, a pitiful attempt at regaining control that only pushed her further into isolation. Financial institutions, alerted by the evidence I'd presented, launched investigations, adding a legal storm to the family's emotional upheaval. Emma's reputation, once unassailable, lay in ruins. I felt a strange mix of vindication and somber reflection as I witnessed the consequences unfold. What had been my quiet suffering was now her reckoning. The family's trust in her shattered like glass, and with each fracture, my control strengthened. The role reversal was complete, but the cost was heavy. Emma was alone now, a cautionary figure in a family fractured by greed and betrayal. I stood firm amidst the wreckage, not triumphant but resolute. Knowing the path forward would demand strength I was ready to claim. Emma's desperation morphed into aggression. She unleashed a barrage of manipulative tactics, summoning distant relatives and mutual friends to her cause. Rumors seeped through the family grapevine, whispers that I was vindictive, fabricating lies to destroy her. Her threats escalated, legal countersuits dangled like daggers, shadowing my every move. Anonymous messages landed in David's inbox, veiled attempts at intimidation. The storm was fierce, but I was no longer caught in its center. I had prepared for this. Every harassing call, every false rumor was met with calm documentation. I handed over evidence to law enforcement before the attacks could escalate further, ensuring the boundary line was clear. Surprisingly, rather than rallying support, Emma's flying monkeys began to falter. Family members, exhausted by her relentless venom, started pulling away, seeing through her last-ditch efforts. The narrative shifted unmistakably in my favor. I responded with measured clarity, never stooping to retaliation, but holding firm to truth and dignity. The more she attacked, the more isolated she became, her power dissolved by her own desperation. I had transformed from the family's scapegoat to a strategist wielding evidence and calm resolve. This was no longer a battle of emotions, but a war of facts. And in this war, I was unshakable. Emma's final manipulation attempts crumbled, her isolation complete, while I stood, unwavering and empowered. The silence that followed was not empty, but filled with a hard-won peace. With Emma's fall, a weight lifted from my shoulders, a freedom I had only dared to imagine. David stood beside me, his steady presence a balm to my wounds, our bond deepening beyond words. Michael, slowly shedding his passivity, began to bridge the chasm between us, acknowledging my pain and pledging fairness for the first time. Even Rachel, slow to change, opened her eyes to my worth beyond the shadows. I set firm boundaries, financial, emotional, social, that no longer left room for exploitation. The idea of buying a home, once a distant dream, now felt tangible, bolstered by restored credit and renewed confidence. Family ties remained complicated, some frayed beyond repair, but I no longer bore the burden of invisibility or silent suffering. Emma faced the consequences she'd sown, a cautionary tale marked by legal and familial fallout. I reflected quietly on my journey, from the depths of betrayal to the heights of self-empowerment. Self-worth, I realized, wasn't granted by family loyalty, but reclaimed through courage and truth. As the sun set on the fractured landscape of my past, I stepped forward into a future defined not by pain, but by strength, hope, and the freedom to live on my own terms. The story ended not with bitterness, but with a quiet, unyielding light,